In the shifting landscape of global geopolitics, few stories illustrate the contest for influence as vividly as the ongoing struggle over Venezuela. Once one of Latin America's wealthiest nations, Venezuela has, over the past 2 decades, become the center of an international tug-of-war involving 3 major global powers: the United States, Russia, and China. Recent reports and analyses suggest that Moscow and Beijing are now standing more firmly than ever behind President Maduro, providing him with both symbolic and material support. Some commentators even describe this as Russia and China expelling U.S. influence from Venezuela. But what does this really mean? Has Washington truly lost its grip on Caracas? And what role do leaders like Donald Trump, Xi Jinping, and Vladimir Putin play in this unfolding drama? Let's break it down. Venezuela sits atop the largest proven oil reserves in the world. Oil is its greatest strength, and yet paradoxically, also its greatest vulnerability. For decades, Venezuela supplied crude oil to global markets, including the United States. But domestic economic mismanagement, corruption, and political turmoil have left the nation in crisis. Inflation soared, millions emigrated, and living standards collapsed. This crisis created an opening for external powers to step in, and they did teach with their own interests. For the United States, Venezuela lies in its own backyard, part of what Washington has long considered its sphere of influence. For Russia, Caracas represents an opportunity to challenge the U.S. close to its home turf. For China, Venezuela offers access to vast energy resources and a stage to expand its global presence. For Washington, Venezuela has been a priority for decades. The U.S. imports oil from the region, maintains ties with its neighbors, and has historically opposed leftist governments it considers hostile. Under several administrations, Washington has imposed sanctions on Venezuelan oil exports, frozen assets, and supported opposition leaders, most notably Juan Guaido declared himself interim president in 2019. Donald Trump, during his presidency, often spoke out against Maduro, labeling him a dictator and calling for his removal. At one point, he even hinted that all options were on the table, including military action. Yet despite the rhetoric, Maduro remained firmly in power. Why? Because he had external lifelines. Russia has become one of Venezuela's most steadfast allies. Moscow's support comes in multiple forms: military cooperation. Russian advisors have visited Caracas. And in 2018, Russian strategic bombers even landed in Venezuela for joint exercises. Financial assistance, loans, debt restructuring, investments by Russian firms such as Rosneft helped keep Venezuela's oil industry afloat. Political backing. In international forums like the United Nations, Moscow consistently defended Maduro's government against U.S.-led resolutions. For Vladimir Putin, this strategy served several purposes: to maintain a presence in Latin America, a region traditionally dominated by the U.S., to counter U.S. influence by supporting governments opposed to Washington, to secure access to energy reserves, ensuring Russian companies benefit from Venezuela's oil wealth. China's involvement in Venezuela is less visible militarily, but highly significant economically. Over the past 2 decades, Beijing has provided tens of billions of dollars in loans, much of it to be repaid in oil shipments. Chinese companies have invested in infrastructure, energy, and telecommunications in Venezuela. For Xi Jinping, Venezuela offers 3 advantages: energy security. Access to vast oil reserves diversifies China's supply lines. Diplomatic leverage. Strengthening ties with Latin American states showcases China's ability to operate far from its home region. South-South solidarity. By backing Venezuela, Beijing positions itself as a champion of developing nations resisting Western pressure. Unlike Russia, China has avoided overt military engagement, but its financial support and trade links are arguably even more important for Venezuela's survival. Together, Russia and China provide a critical safety net for Maduro. Russia offers political cover and limited military reassurance. China provides economic breathing room through investment and trade. This combination makes it difficult for U.S. sanctions alone to achieve their intended effect. In fact, Maduro often highlights his alliances with Moscow and Beijing as proof that Venezuela is not isolated, or rather part of a broader coalition resisting U.S. dominance. For the United States, this is frustrating. Despite years of sanctions, Despite repeated declarations that Maduro must go, Washington has not been able to dislodge him. This has fueled the perception that America is being pushed out of Venezuela, or at least that its influence is waning. When commentators say Russia and China have expelled the U.S., what they mean is that the combination of Moscow's and Beijing's support has effectively blocked Washington's efforts. The symbolic message is powerful. Even in its own hemisphere, the U.S. cannot always get its way. Donald Trump, as president, often projected strength and promised bold action. Yet Venezuela revealed the limits of American power. His administration recognized Juan as interim president and rallied dozens of countries to follow suit, but ultimately failed to seize power, and Maduro held on. Trump reportedly explored multiple strategies, including harsher sanctions and diplomatic pressure, but direct intervention never came. For his critics, this was a sign that Trump's tough talk did not translate into decisive results. For his supporters, it showed he avoided another costly foreign entanglement. Either way, the perception that Russia and China stood firm while Washington hesitated became a defining narrative. When Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin publicly expressed support for Maduro, it carries weight beyond Venezuela. It signals to the world that the U.S. no longer acts alone in deciding the fate of smaller nations. Russia and China are willing to confront Washington directly, even in the Western Hemisphere. The emerging world order is multipolar, not unipolar. For Maduro, this support boosts his domestic legitimacy. For Putin and Xi, it's another chance to showcase global leadership. Of course, supporting Venezuela is not without risks for Moscow and Beijing. For Russia, the financial burden is significant. Venezuela's oil industry is unstable, and sanctions make operations risky. For China, billions of dollars in loans remain unpaid, raising concerns about whether the partnership is sustainable. Both countries risk diplomatic backlash from other Latin American states, wary of foreign interference. Still, for now, the symbolic benefits seem to outweigh the material costs. Where does this leave the United States? Options are limited. Military intervention is highly unlikely and would be politically costly. Sanctions continue, but have failed to topple Maduro. Diplomacy remains possible, but Washington must accept that Russia and China are part of the equation. In the long run, the future of Venezuela will depend not only on outside powers, but on internal dynamics, the economy, public opinion, and the ability of the government to deliver stability. So, has Russia and China truly expelled the U.S. from Venezuela? It's not completely. Washington still wields influence through sanctions, diplomacy, and its regional partnerships. But there is no denying that its grip has loosened. For Maduro, this means survival. For Trump, it was a reminder of the limits of American power. For Xi and Putin, it is a chance to assert themselves as global players. Ultimately, Venezuela's crisis is not just about one country. It is a stage on which the great powers rehearse the drama of the 21st century. The transition from a U.S.-dominated world to one where multiple centers of power compete for influence. And in that drama, Venezuela is not just a nation in crisis, it is a symbol of the changing world order itself.